So when I finished stitching the length of the Climashield, I had some help from my wife. She kind of pulled it through the machine while I held it here and kept this material flat and tight. Helps eliminate puckers and other issues. This stuff is so thin it tends to kind of go where it wants to. Next thing I did was to stitch the bottom closed. I'd left that open so that I could get at the Climashield up in here by reaching in, moving things around. Now that's stitched together, and I put three about 1 inch tack stitches down at the bottom. Time to stitch the top together up to the zipper. I'm going to do that with it right side out so that the seam that's created will not be inside and be, catching or rubbing up against me. That will create a pretty nice smooth seam on the inside. So the first thing I got to do is bring out my lovely giant pins and start putting this together. I wanted to get it very accurate and make sure that the pins are holding it in place. I'm going to do that all along this edge. Pretty straightforward. I could use small pins for this because it's a pretty easy job. Not a bulky thing like the Climashield was. But I really like these pins. So I'm going to use them. Put them about every, 4 inches or so. And when I do that, I make sure it's nice and tight and that it's lined up properly. Getting up to the zipper. Be careful here. So now I've got the baffle to deal with. I'm actually going to put a couple of pins through here and through the baffle to make sure it stays out of the way. I do not want to stitch over that. That's it. I don't want it to be misaligned when I do my final stitch up on this. Get this all put together and zip it up a few inches. I'll probably come back and stitch across here just to make sure everything is locked in really good. Stitching very carefully along here. Let's see, the baffle goes to about there, so I've got it out of the way. All right. I think this is going to work fine. I've turned the bag inside out, and this is the center seam right here with the baffle. Now there's nothing holding the baffle in place, so it might flop around a little bit and not cover the zipper. So I'm going to tack this down on the end. It's always been the plan, and that will help keep it in place so that I don't end up with a draft. I have to redo this section of the video because I screwed it up on my first try. That's going to be a challenge because I've already done all the sewing on the bottom for the foot box. So what I did was cut out another quilt. Yeah, I've got another one. And I'm going to show you how I measure in order to calculate the size of the foot box. And it's pretty straightforward. Take a ruler, yardstick rather, take a yardstick and put it inside somewhat tight, and then see what the length is. This comes out to about 29.5. That means if I double that, I know what the total length is that I'll have to work with to make the foot box. So 29.5 times 2 is about 59 inches. So I'll be taking about 9 inches on each side, and it'll leave me about 19 inches or so for the bottom and the top in a rectangular foot box. So there we are. I have checked my math, my arithmetic. Hate to call adding and subtracting small numbers math, but anyway, I checked it, and given that I measured the bottom of the sleeping bag at 28.5, that gives me 57 for the entire circumference of the foot box. If I take a pair of 9-inch sides, that takes away 18 inches from that 57, leaving me 39 inches. Divide 39 in half, 19.5. That'll be these longer sides. So I'm going to end up with a pretty nice, comfortable size foot box, and my feet will be probably about able to go about this far apart. I like that. I don't like them to be crunched together. So I'm going to get that marked up. All I'm going to do is fold over the material and measure it to about 1.25 inches bigger than the dimensions I just measured. That'll give me a seam allowance. And remember, I'm going to be turning it inside out, so that extra material will actually be mostly inside of the foot box pouch, or whatever it is. I'm not sure what to call it. That will give me enough room that I won't be crowded on my stitching, and it'll all fit in well. And if I need to, it's better to have a little more fabric in this piece I'm adding in, because I can always adjust my stitch to come in on it on one or more of the sides. But if it's too small, that's going to be a problem. So I'll get that marked up, and then I'll do some stitching and show you how that goes together. So, making some good progress on the foot box cover. I stitched on 3 sides, turned it right side out so that the seam and stitching was inside. Then I slid in a double layer of Climashield. I mean, just barely is there enough, but it's good. Then I stitched the corners in the end and on here and here. That'll hold it in place. It's not going to move around. Won't cost anything significant in terms of insulation value. Then I folded in the raw edges so that they're about 1/2 inch inside, and I've pinned it, and I'm going to stitch along here. Then I will do the same thing on this end that I did here. It'll be a little more tricky because the Climashield has to be slid over and held in place, but with my almighty pins, I think I can manage that. So I'll stitch that up, get it ready, and then the next thing will be to install it in the bottom of the sleeping bag. Pretty exciting, almost there. I've pinned this together. It turns out that this piece that I've got to sew on the bottom to make the foot box was about 1/4, maybe 3/8 of an inch too small. I thought it was going to be too big. So I think revisiting the instructions on how to make this, I'd go with a full 1.5 inches extra on this dimension and this dimension, just to make sure that you don't come up short. I've had to adjust it a little bit along the way, and you can see I've got a lot of pins in here. I think there's about 30 of them, including all 24 of my big pins. Alternatively, to make it smaller, I could close up this top seam a little bit here. Might end up just working out that that's what happens, because I'm going to stitch that last. So if, as I'm going around, the material bunches up here, that's just where it'll be stitched together. So I'm going to get that done. I'm really eager to finish this. It's been a long journey. This is going to be a great bag. I've stitched in the foot box piece. Came out really good. Really happy with it. The Climashield is going to stay in place. It's nice and fluffy, 2 layers. It was a little bit small, so as I mentioned, when I got back to this center seam where it was open about 3/4 of an inch, I just had neglected to stitch it all the way down, and that was a fortunate thing. That goes into the tips. I was able to overlap this material a little bit to take up some of the slack, and I only have a couple of real small puckers in this material. So pretty nice seam, all the way around, nice and clean. I'm just pretty thrilled with how that's come out. I'll have plenty of room side to side, so I can put my feet, out toward the edges a little bit. And I've got a real nice loft here, nice distance, so that when my feet are up, they won't be cramped or pushing against it. This is working out great. Okay, to the head to do drawstrings, and I have decided I'm going to put that little crescent of extra material in to try to create more of a hood. That'll give this bag, I don't know, 3 or 4 more degrees Fahrenheit of comfort, and that can make a difference. So on to the next part.